Hello again. My name's Mary, and I'm the Director of Youth Services at the Portland Public Library in Portland, Maine. And I'm here with you today to continue reading Some Writer, the story of E.B. White by Melissa Sweet. It was published in 2016 by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And we are up to Chapter 8. Bad news. A pig shall be saved. Fred was not Andy and Catherine's first dog, nor their last, but he was the dog Andy wrote most about. There was plenty to say about Fred. Fred came up from a pet store on Madison Avenue. Though Andy considered Fred at times vile, he could not imagine life without him. One warm afternoon in Maine, Andy's pig failed to appear for supper. As Andy wrote, "When a pig, or a child, refuses supper, a chill wave of fear runs through any household." As it became evident, the pig was not well. Andy worried. The animals on the White farm were part of a natural rhythm. They were born, nursed, and fed, and they enjoyed peaceful surroundings. And then some swiftly died. Raising animals to be butchered sometimes bothered Andy. "I do not like to betray a person or a creature," he said. After befriending his animals, this felt like double dealing. But like most who raise animals, he farmed for food. Still, even if this sick pig was meant for slaughter, he didn't like seeing it suffer. Andy called neighbors for advice. He and Joel tried giving the pig castor oil, then an enema. As the pig worsened, Fred's spirits seemed to rise. Eventually, a vet arrived and repeated what Andy had done, but still the pig's health declined. By now, the pig did not even have the strength to make a bed for himself. Andy went to tend to the pig one last evening and saw with grief that the pig had died. Andy went to bed. When he awoke the next morning, his handyman, Lenny, was already digging the grave. Fred was supervising under a bleak gray sky. Lenny and Andy hauled the pig into the grave and filled it with dirt. Andy tied a rope to Fred, and they all made their way back to the house. Fred, reluctantly, bringing up the rear. Though death was part of life on the farm, the death of the pig unsettled Andy. He looked for redemption. He wanted to find some way to save a pig's life. When Fred died later that year, at age 13, Andy buried him near the pig and decided to write a book about animals and about saving a pig's life. But by what miracle on a farm could a pig's life be saved? Andy began to be on the lookout for wonders. I knelt, saw that he was dead, and left him there. His face had a mild look, expressive neither of deep peace nor of deep suffering, although I think he had suffered a good deal. From Atlantic Monthly. Title, Death of a Pig. Date, 1948. Fred's grave is the only grave I visit with any regularity. I do not experience grief when I'm down there, but I feel sadness at all last things. Sorrow not at my dog's death, but at my own, which hasn't even occurred yet, but which saddens me just to think about in such pleasant surroundings. From Essays of E.B. White. Title, Bedfellows. Date, 1956. Chapter 9, Charlotte's Web. I had as much trouble getting off the ground as the Wright brothers. One October evening, Andy watched a spider spin an egg sac and deposit her eggs. A few days later, he carefully detached the egg sac, put it in an old candy box with air holes, and brought it with him back to New York. He left it on his dresser, and a few weeks later he noticed hundreds of tiny spiders coming out of the air holes and stringing lines from the box to his mirror, his comb, his brush. An entomologist from the Museum of Natural History helped him identify the spider as Arania cavatica, a plain gray spider that prefers shady situations. It lives in houses and barns in northern New England. Its webs are sometimes very large. Later, back in Maine, as Andy was bringing a pail of slops to the barn, an idea struck him. He wanted to write a story about animals. He needed a way to save a pig's life. Could a spider save a pig? He wrote to his editor, Ursula, to ask if there had ever been a spider as a main character in a children's book. Not as far as she knew, she said, or at least not since Miss Muffet. In October 1949, he wrote his publisher, Cass Canfield, "My next book is in sight. I look at it every day. I keep it in a carton as you would a kitten." Andy spent the years studying spiders. "In this," he wrote, "I found the key to the story." Andy would not make his heroine, Charlotte A. Cavatica, conform to his narrative. His story would have to adapt to how spiders behave. For example, Andy learned that some male species of spiders dance. So in one draft, Charlotte tells Wilbur, the pig, that her husband was some dancer. When Fern listens as Charlotte tells the barn animals how her cousin cast a web that caught a fish, Andy was being true to spiders. Because in rare cases, spiders have caught small birds and fish. And when Wilbur takes Charlotte's egg sac to the barn, to the farm, in his mouth, it makes sense because A. Cavatica's egg sacs are waterproof. Wish you could be here today to see my characters in the flesh. Had a lamb arrive yesterday morning at breakfast time. A boy. He's already out in the barnyard, playing in a snowdrift. 2 of my geese are nesting, one of them right in the sheep shed, the other atop a manure pile. Charlotte's children are due shortly. It's quite a day here today. From Letters of E.B. White, date 1952. When Andy finished the story in 1951, he wrote to Ursula that a draft was complete, but he wasn't quite satisfied with it, so he had set it aside to let it ripen. Months later, though the tale still featured the barns and its animals, Andy had added 5 more chapters to give Fern more importance in the story. And he kept struggling with the first line. He began, Charlotte was a gray spider who lived in the doorway of a barn. Then he tried, I shall speak first of Wilbur. Then, a barn can have a horse in it, and a barn can have a cow in it, and a barn can have hens scratching in the chaff and swallows flying in and out through the door. But if a barn hasn't got a pig in it, it's hardly worth talking about. After setting aside the story for a year, he tried. At midnight, John Arable pulled his boots on, lit a lantern, and walked out to the hog house. Lost, White cut to the action and tried. Where's Papa going with that hand axe? Then shortened it to, where's Papa going with that axe? After revising for another year, Andy sent the final manuscript to Ursula. She loved it immediately and did not recommend changing a word. But after she saw a printer's proof, she wrote to Catherine urging the Whites to consider one important alteration: changing the title of the second to last chapter from The Death of Charlotte to Last Day, so as not to give away the ending. Garth Williams agreed to illustrate Charlotte's Web, describing the story as just perfect. Andy wanted Charlotte's character to be both beguiling and a New Englander, precise and disciplined. Garth based Fern on his daughter, Fiona, but he struggled with drawing Charlotte. He tried putting a human face on Charlotte. That was not the look Andy was after. Andy then sent Garth 2 spider books for reference. Garth later described them as gruesome. There's a very funny picture in this book that I think Garth should see. It is A. The eyes and hair are quite fetching. Plate 1 shows an orb web covered with dew. From Letters of E.B. White, date 1952. Garth wrote, I struggled to invent a lovable spider face. Finally, I gave her a Mona Lisa face, as she is, after all, the heroine of the story. Many sketches later, Garth had her almost perfectly rendered when Andy added 2 eyes and 3 hairs to Garth's drawing. Now she was pretty and a New Englander. Charlotte's Web was finally released in 1952. Why did you do all this for me? He asked. I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you. You have been my friend, replied Charlotte. That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's a life anyway? We're born. We live a little while. We die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life a trifle. Heaven knows, anyone's life can stand a little of that. From Charlotte's Web, date 1952. In one review, the writer, Eudora Welty, describes the story. What the book is about is friendship on earth, affection and protection, adventure and miracle, life and death, trust and treachery, pleasure and pain, and the passing of time. What it all proves is that all human beings must always be on the watch for the coming of wonders. As a piece of work, it is just about perfect. Though Andy agreed to allow a movie to be made, he was skeptical that the magic of the story could be captured on film. He reminded the movie's director that the film should be a pan to life, a hymn to the barn, an acceptance of dung. The barn is a community of rugged individualists, everybody mildly suspicious of everybody else, including me. He went to great lengths to ensure that the movie was as close to the book as possible. That Templeton starts as a rat and ends as a rat. And most important, that Charlotte dies. Charlotte's Web won a Newbery honor and remains one of the most beloved children's books of all time. When Andy recorded the audiobook for Charlotte's Web, it took him 17 takes to get through last day, the chapter in which Charlotte dies. It's ridiculous, he told the producer. A grown man reading a book that he wrote and being unable to read it aloud because of tears. I just want to add that there is no symbolism in Charlotte's Web. There's no political meaning in the story. It's a straight report from the barn cellar, which I dearly love, having spent so many fine hours there, winter and summer, spring and fall, good times, bad times, with garrulous geese, the passage of swallows, the nearness of rats, and the sameness of sheep. From Letters of E.B. White, date 1971. Chapter 10. The Elements of Style. A misspelled word is an abomination. In Maine, Andy wrote in his boathouse, which was the same size and dimensions as the cabin where Henry David Thoreau wrote Walden. Inside the boathouse were the same things Thoreau had had in his cabin: a table, a chair, a wood stove. Andy wrote, "Walden is the only book I own, although there are some others unclaimed on my shelves." Thoreau's cry of simplicity, simplicity, simplicity had for Andy the insistence of a fire alarm, and inspired not only his writing, but how he lived his life. One day, a Cornell classmate sent Andy The Elements of Style, a book written by his old English professor, Will Strunk. Andy had forgotten the book, but not his professor. Will Strunk had died a few years earlier. Almost immediately, Andy wrote an essay for the New Yorker describing Strunk and his little book on the fundamentals of English grammar that urged writing students to be clear, brief, bold. An editor at Macmillan, Jack Case, read the essay and wanted to publish a revised Elements of Style by Strunk and White, with Andy's essay as an introduction. Andy agreed, concluding the book with an approach to style, which was advice based on what he had learned as a writer. Omit needless words. Vigorous writing is concise. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph no unnecessary sentences, for the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine no unnecessary parts. This requires not that the writer make all his sentences short, or that he avoid all detail and treat his subjects only in outline, but that every word tell. There you have a short, valuable essay on the nature and beauty of brevity. 63 words that should change the world. From The Elements of Style, date 1959. The book began with rules of grammar. Form the possessive singular of nouns by adding s. Follow this rule whatever the final consonant. Thus write: Charlie's friend, Burns's poems, the witch's malice. Then the book moved on to rules of composition. Writing, to be effective, must follow closely the thoughts of the writer, but not necessarily in the order in which those thoughts occur. And form. Exclamations. Do not attempt to emphasized simple statements by using a mark of exclamation. It was a wonderful show. It was a wonderful show. The exclamation mark is to be reserved for use after true exclamations or commands. What a wonderful show! Halt! And commonly misused words and expressions like, not to be used for the conjunction as. We spent the evening like in the old days. We spent the evening as in the old days. But once a writer understands the rules of grammar, what about style? In The Elements of Style, White writes, the approach to style is by way of plainness, simplicity, orderliness, and sincerity. He offers hints for the beginning writer. More than a few good writers have taken his suggestions. The poet Joyce Sidman, a Newbery honoree, writes, White's point in his list of reminders are the fundamentals on which I have built my own writing style. Be clear, but do not explain too much. And write with nouns and verbs would be, indeed, the recipe for good poetry. I still use The Elements of Style to look up the lingering questions, that or which. That which. That is the defining or restrictive pronoun, which the non-defining or non-restrictive. The lawnmower that is broken is in the garage tells which one. The lawnmower which is broken is in the garage adds a fact about the only mower in question. White's early poem, A Story of a Little Mouse, is an example of the proper use of the word which, as is Sidman's that. In her following poem, that wraps up. Belly full, he drops down from the echoing room of night, one last swift swoop, one last bug plucked from air, with cup tail scooped neatly to mouth. As dark grows thin and body heavy, he tumbles to tree and grasps bark. Folds that swirl of cape tipped with tiny claws and snags the spot that smells like home. Then upside down. Then upside flip. Lock on grip. Stretch, hang, relax, yawn. Dawn. Joyce Sidman, from Dark Emperor and Other Poems of the Night. Paul Fleischman, a Newbery medalist, writes, I have this rule carved deep in my memory. Avoid the use of qualifiers. Rather, very, little, pretty. These are the leeches that infest the pond of prose, sucking the blood of words. I actually once tried to write an entire novel without a single adverb. I didn't quite make it. Sometimes you need them, but sentences are almost always stronger without them. I could have begun Seed Folks with, hesitantly, I stood barefoot, a few feet in front of our extremely old chipped mahogany altar. but less is often more in writing, which is why the opening sentences read, I stood before our family altar. It was dawn. No one else in the apartment was awake. Kate DiCamillo, also a Newbery medalist, writes, though I have the elements of style within 2 steps of my desk and refer to it frequently, what I keep going back to in a ritualistic way are White's essays and Charlotte's Web, of course. The thing about White that comforts and fascinates me and challenges me is how he manages to make his words matter more. It is as if he's able to make one word do the work of 10. He bears down with the whole of his heart and soul on each word he chooses. For those trying to find the right words and to edit their own work, E.B. White suggested that revising is part of writing, and that if writing needs stirring up, scissors should be brought into play. Even though Andy had agreed to work on the revised edition of the Elements of Style under the condition that it stayed true to Strunk's original text, he did not consider himself a grammarian. When I finally can't take any more grammar, he wrote, I hop on my bicycle and go scorching up and down the highway to remove the cobwebs. He wrote to his editor, Jack Case, I feel terrible responsibility in this project, and it's making me jumpy. 3 years after the revised edition was published, Andy wrote to Case, Fiddler Bayou, 30 March 1962. Dear Jack, the next grammar book I bring out, I want to tell how to end a sentence with 5 prepositions. A father of a little boy goes upstairs after supper to read to his son, but he brings the wrong book. The boy says, what did you bring that book for? What did you bring that book that I don't want to be read to out of up for? And how are you? Yours, Andy. And we will end our reading there today, and we'll be back tomorrow to read more of Sunrider, the story of E.B. White by Melissa Sweet. My name's Mary, and I'm the Director of Youth Services at the Portland Public Library. And I'll be back next time. Bye-bye.